Hello and welcome to Attacking Third. Thanks for joining us on YouTube. We are going to continue our team by team previews, and today we're going to chat all things Kansas City Current and Racing Louisville. So make sure you subscribe, like this video, drop us your thoughts in the chat. We want to hear from you about Kansas City and Racing Louisville. Hello and welcome to Attacking Third, the CBS Sports Soccer Podcast. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's segment, we are going to start with a Kansas City Current preview. So a quick reminder before we take a deep dive into the Current. Leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. We're also on YouTube, so subscribe to us at youtube.com/attackingthird, and you get all sorts of exclusive NWSL content, preview, recaps, interviews, and so much more here on A3. Lisa, we're keeping it rolling. We're rolling down the river.
We sure are. Rolling down the river. Oh gosh, I've missed all these water puns. I'm so bad at them too. They always take a few extra seconds to hit me. But yes, we're cruising with our team by team previews. The season's coming up, March 25th. It all starts. The regular season underway. No more Challenge Cup preseason for the NWSL this year. It's going to be a mid-season tournament. So right on the 25th, right out the gate, opening games for these teams. It'll be here before you know it. And you can watch all the games on Paramount Plus, which is very exciting. But I am really excited to dive into Kansas City with you because this is the team we talk a lot about on Attacking Third. And we got a lot to talk about them. A lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of questions. We got a lot.
All that matters is that we're starting it off with puns. Who doesn't love a good preview full of puns? We're here to provide, as always. March 25th, right around the corner. It's going to be here sooner than we think. Paramount Plus, CBS Sports platforms, you can catch all the action. Let's start with an overview here for Kansas City Current. Head coach Matt Potter in his second year with the team. And they finished in 2022 as the runners-up in the NWSL Championship final. They lost in the final to Portland Thorns FC. And we had a lot of fun that week, kind of, experiencing the entirety of the event, getting to chat with so many folks involved with both teams. And the Kansas City Current side of things, it just sort of really felt like this, a bit of we've arrived kind of moment for them. And it took us, a little bit by surprise. I think when we were watching that final to see them look a little stagnant, a little, almost. And it was a near first or worst to first kind of finish for them. And that was a big storyline for them leading up into that final as well. But they've made some moves in this offseason to try to get back there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had to do that, right? This is a KC side that from the very beginning has said what they want to be in this league, what kind of team they want to be, what kind of club, what kind of franchise in this league. They want to be looked at as one of the best on the pitch, off the pitch, with their facilities, with their training staff, with their mindset as professionals. And I think 2022 really showed us that they were going to make that a reality, that they were taking it very seriously, going from finishing dead last in the league to ending up in the final. And with that and all the changes that they made throughout the offseason, they were looking to make their already good roster, their NWSL Championship roster, even better. What could they do to make it better? And they looked at the free agency roster list and they said, we want all of these players. Essentially, that's what they said, because Kansas City in the offseason, they picked up Morgan Gautrat and Vanessa DiBernardo to namestay midfielders from Chicago Red Stars, veterans in the league, veterans playing alongside each other, two players that will fit in seamlessly to this roster. Then the biggest free agent of them all, Brazilian international Debinha midfielder, Kansas City snags her somehow. I mean, Debinha saying, we like their facilities. I like what Kansas City's doing there. And a pretty penny for Debinha on her end, because that's what she deserves. And before you know it, Kansas City's already really good midfield has just become fantastic, perhaps a little overcrowded, but fantastic. And that was only in the free agency window.
Yeah, they made moves everywhere. Look, we gave this team the offseason grade of an A+. They were winners of the offseason for us, and on paper, everything that they did in the offseason was to improve their chances on not only returning to the championship final, but winning titles. So whether that is an NWSL Championship or the NWSL Shield, or even Challenge Cup, something that's going to run concurrently with the regular season in 2023, there's a lot out there up for grabs coming up in this season. And Kansas City's move sort of signaled to me that they want to try to compete for all of it. And it's not just that free agency period. I mean, we saw this team dabble in trades during draft week, and they also made acquisitions in the international windows. So not only did they, were they part of a multi-team trade and ended up getting moving up in the standings for the number 2 pick and ended up selecting Michelle Cooper, they also selected Alexa Spanstra, someone who was rated even in the draft in last year, and we had her on draft boards when we were doing all of our draft previewing in the offseason of 2022. So this was a player that was targeted from, I think other teams as well. So to kind of walk out with the draft day haul that they had, I thought was equally as impressive of all the work that they did during the free agency window. Yeah. So they work the free agency period, they work the draft, they also go out and acquire 2 Swedish internationals, not 1 but 2, in defender Hannah Glass and Mimi Larsson, who I think that was one of their earlier signings of the offseason, and that kind of got pushed to the back burner a little bit because they kept making all of these moves, and like there was a new headline around this team, it felt, in the offseason almost every other week or so.
Yes, this is insane. Like the amount of players that they've got and that they've acquired, because I don't know, that's like the craziest thing. It's top tier across the board, top tier in their free agency, 3 starting caliber midfielders, top tier in their draft picks, 2 players. Number 2 overall in Michelle Cooper, and then even Alexis Spanstra, who's been now signed a contract with Kansas City. These are 2 players that could start, right? And on another team in the league, they might start. I'm not so sure at this point, just looking at the depth and the talent that KC has. And then they go and get Hannah Glass and Mimi Larsson, 2 players that are Swedish internationals. They could also start. So it's like scraping the top of the barrel across all fronts, from trades to draft to what they picked up in the free agency. They've added a lot of pieces. And with adding those pieces, so much of it is a balance game for teams and what they're doing with adding pieces, and also what they've lost in the offseason or due to injury, trades, retiring, etc. And Kansas City gained a lot more than they lost in the offseason, in a lot more. We talked about how during the draft, Kansas City made a number of strategic moves and trades to draft up and go number 2 overall, getting Michelle Cooper out of Duke. And they had to trade with Gotham FC to get that. And the price for Gotham FC was U.S. international forward Lynn Williams, who unfortunately did not play a lot of time at all last year with Kansas City. She played a handful of games during the Challenge Cup at the start of the year, and then was out the rest of the season due to injury. So I would argue didn't even see time really in Kansas City. Such a limited time that it's almost like, okay, they're not as much losing her because they didn't really have a full grasp on her. Even though Williams is back completely, she's playing with the U.S. senior national team, played in She Believes Cup, getting significant minutes. I think that the trade-off, though, is okay for Kansas City in losing Lynn Williams.
I mean, it's not just an experienced player and someone like Williams. I mean, they also made a move with All Rain, at least Bennett, and now with the Pacific Northwest team versus, retaining another season with Kansas City Current. So, I mean, they're not going to have her to go to, and she was kind of this evolved into like this option for them off the bench after having a pretty successful Challenge Cup appearances with Kansas City. And it just sort of felt like she was a player that they could go to and bring into maybe, second half or late game scenarios to try to change things up, kind of like a maybe a little bit of an X factor type of role a little bit. But they also bid farewell to Taylor Leach, right? Announcing retirement as well. That's something that happens over the course of the offseason. So losing some different players, but that just seems so minimal when we sort of compare that to kind of the gains that they made over the course of their offseason. Again, whether it was during free agency, whether it was during the trade, or if it was during just regular signing and acquisition. So there's a lot to look through, though, in between the positions on the roster. It's not just some of these big names and these big movements that we've been chatting about already. We're going to take a look at the remainder of the roster, maybe chat a little bit about some players who stand out. Stick with us after a quick break. All right, we're back. Let's break down this Kansas City current roster because one of the things that we also really enjoy when we're looking at teams during the preseason are all the names that sort of end up on a preseason roster. So many, jokes that go around if it's going to be over or under 30 players for some teams. But let's take a look at Kansas City and maybe, look at some of the players that we haven't had a chance to chat about already with this team. The goalkeepers, stands out with Adriana Franco, Cassie Miller, also amongst the goalkeeping core here. They also had Ashley Orcus, someone they drafted, and Jordan Silkowitz, also a draftee to round out with 4 goalkeepers during preseason. A hefty number, double digits, 11 with defenders: Elizabeth Ball, Kate Del Fava, Alex Loera, Haley Mace, Addison Merrick, Makia McInnes. We've got Gabby Robertson, Izzy Rodriguez, Ella Schomburger, Mallory Weber, and Jenna Weinbrenner. Midfielders: Ryan Childers, Chardonnay Coran, Debinia, Vanessa DiBernardo, Morgan Gautrat. We've talked a little bit about those players already, but Lola Bonta, Claire Lavauger, Chloe Lagarzo, Sam Mewis, and Desiree Scott included in the midfield core as well. And forwards, they listed 5 with Michelle Cooper, Kristen Hamilton, Cece Kaiser, Mimi Larson, and Alexa Spantra to round things out there. So we're going 4 goalkeepers, 11 and 10 midfielders, and 5 forwards for Kansas City current. There's a lot of names here.
I know. That's the thing. There's a lot of names on this preseason roster. And a lot of really good names. I couldn't help but giggle and smile when you're running through the midfielders. Debinia, Vanessa DiBernardo, Morgan Gautrat, Lola Bonta, Claire Lavauger, Chloe Lagarzo, Desiree Scott, and Sam Mewis, right? Like, this is some other things. This may be considered a loss. We don't know how far she'll be out, but Sam Mewis, one of the players on this roster and with the United States Women's National Team that is out due to injury. She put out a statement a few weeks ago saying that her recovery is taking longer than she expected, and she's going to be out for a bit for the foreseeable future. Who knows what that means, how long that'll really be. But I think when you're a Kansas City team, you cannot expect to get a player like that back this year. And if you do, you're just excited and you're happy and you're going to run with it. But you have to move forward with the pieces you have. Expect the worst, hope for the best kind of situation. But running through this roster, I think goalkeepers, I have to start with them because there are 4 listed on this roster. And AD Franch being one of them, who is a U.S. international who has been consistently called up in the last several months to the United States Women's National Team. And they've also got a Cassie Miller who could start and play. So I think, like, in looking down the line of the 2023 year, knowing that it's a World Cup year, knowing that there's going to be a send-off series for the U.S., knowing that there's going to be a lot of different pieces coming in and out, you are very pleased if you're Matt Potter with an AD Franch and a Cassie Miller as your number 1 and your number 2 in goal. That's a great base. That's a great base. And you're also returning so many incredible pieces from last year in a Haley Mace and Addison Merrick, who stepped into this team and started making an impact immediately. A Jenna Weinbrenner, an Elizabeth Ball, a Kate Del Fava, Alex Luera. These are all players that were big parts of the finals run in 2022, and now you've got them back. I mean, this roster is stacked. On paper, this roster is stacked, Sandra.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's an argument to be made, in all of the movement that they had in their offseason, that their re-signings were of equal importance as well. I mean, Alex Loera had a breakout rookie season, and there was just an unreal, like incomprehensible, unpredictable rookie class to evaluate and analyze in 2022, with only 3 finalists for a Rookie of the Year award, right? But you can look at Alex Loera's season with Kansas City Current and maybe sort of say, like, this is a player that might have got snubbed, in the category of, being a finalist. But this was a player that they immediately targeted in their offseason and said, we want to re-sign you. Let's renegotiate your contract. Let's lock you up. Haley Mace is going to stay with the Current for on a multi-year deal. Keito Fava was one of these players, I think, that started out with the Current and has sort of just grown and built over time over the last couple seasons with this team, sort of become this kind of reliable player for this team moving forward. So like those 3 players as re-signings, I thought were really, really massive for them as well.
Also looking at someone like a CC Kaiser on that list as well, because this is a player that got traded from Racing Louisville to be in her hometown in Kansas City, and at the end of the 2022 season, re-signed with KC through the 2024 season. And this is a massive signing in CC Kaiser. I'm adding her right along that list with the other ones that re-signed for sure.
And they did a lot of those first. They were like, let's make sure we lock up and take care of players who got us here, who've been on this very short, very kind of, kind of like long journey at the same time. I mean, they've only been in existence as a franchise since 2021, but that was such a tough first season for them. Ultimately staying in last place throughout the duration of that inaugural season, and then having this type of turnaround in 2022. So I like that this was early on their to-do list to make sure that they kind of wrapped up and had renegotiations with those players. But that also meant that when we saw them navigating free agency, you talked a little bit about Sam Mewis, Lisa, and it just sort of felt like once we saw them making these, these pickups, whether it was a Morgan Gautrat, Vanessa DiBernardo, what was going to happen with Sam Mewis? And we now know that they actually renegotiated her contract, bought her contract out. It's going to be in a 1 year, so you could just focus on her rehab and getting back, because she announced that she had an additional surgery as well. So the focus for Sam Mewis is just to get healthy and try to work her way back. But it also meant that we didn't hear a lot of news or movement around Desiree Scott either. And this was a piece that they added on, and they did re-sign her, but this came very late in the free agency period, just ahead of preseason for this team. So then it was like, okay, so you are going to keep Desiree Scott, and that includes all of, with the players that they acquired, but there's also, players that they drafted that could possibly slot into this role. But I think it's interesting that 2 of their I guess considered prospects out of the draft not only have signed contracts, but are listed as forwards for their preseason. So we have talked a little bit about this player for some time. We were able to chat with Michelle Cooper on A3, and that's kind of why we're going with her as our young prospect to watch for Kansas City. I'm not too sure, though, if we're going to see a lot of time for some of these younger players, whether it's a Cooper or a Spanstra, but I would anticipate that during a World Cup, an opportunity will present itself for some of these young players to get a run out and make an impact.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. But again, this roster already has so much talent. So adding in a player like this, it's very different for this team compared to last year, where they had so many rookies, but they had a lot of space to play them. They had a lot of opportunity. Now Kansas City is right. They started 2022 with nothing to lose because they finished dead last the year before. So they could only go up from there. Right now, I think there's a bit more pressure on Kansas City because they went to the final last year, because they have this target on their back as being one of the best teams. How do they fit into that narrative? And I think when you look at someone like Michelle Cooper, although she's young, coming out, entering the draft as a sophomore, finishing her sophomore year at Duke before becoming a professional, she's still a player that has a sense of maturity about her. And we had the pleasure of interviewing Michelle Cooper on Attacking Third and asking her about the process and how it worked. And yes, she's young. I mean, she is a kid, but she still had this level of maturity about her that said she was ready to be a professional from what I took away. Maybe a little bit more so than some of the other draft picks, just because of what she knew and what she understood at this point. And for a sophomore, I think that was pretty impressive. And I want Michelle Cooper to come into this team and make a really big difference. And from the way that Kansas City has already spotlighted Michelle Cooper on their social medias a little bit, it shows me that they're very pleased with what she's seeing in training. I'm going to put that out there like that.
Hey, it could signal that, we might see Michelle Cooper crack an opening day starting 11. And listen, if that happens, that is going to be incredibly cool. But with a young prospect like Cooper, it's likely that some of these younger players are going to try to look to, veterans on the team to try to mirror and learn from. And we sort of segue this by talking about somebody like Desiree Scott. But in terms of what her signing means to this team, this is also another player that they've got on their roster that they did re-sign, that they have retained with the club, but is also navigating this first part of the season with an injury. So this is another player that this team is not going to have for a good chunk of the season. Because let's just anticipate that somebody like Desiree Scott, who also represents Canada's national team, may likely go to the World Cup, right? So in the event that this team is looking for that experienced player to lean on, is it going to be Scott? And why is it going to be Scott if she's someone who may not be part of some of these early game day rosters?
Yeah, she won't be because of injury at this point. I mean, we know that now. She put out a statement saying that she's going to miss the start of the year due to an injury that Scott has picked up. But I don't think that deters us from labeling her as this experienced veteran that Kansas City needs to lean on in any way, shape, or form, because so much of what we know from Desi Scott is yes, her performance on the pitch as a defensive midfielder. She's nicknamed the Destroyer. We see her do it for club, for country. She is stable. She's so even keeled in that midfield. That's exactly who you want your captain to be, your leader, your playmaker in the midfield and on the pitch, understanding everything that they have to do to be that leader, but also off the pitch. She's a player that so many of her teammates have talked about as being a big sister, or one that takes others under their wings. And we know that's going to happen whether she's playing on the pitch or not due to injury. So it has to be Scott in this position. And I think it's pretty interesting because Desiree Scott was a free agent this year, and she was on that free agency list for a very long time before Kansas City re-signed her. And Sandra, you and I don't know what that story is about. If she was looking elsewhere, if Kansas City made an offer immediately and Desi wanted to kind of pursue other options, see what was out there, play the game a little bit, maybe ask for a bit more money, see what had happened. And ultimately, she did re-sign with Kansas City, which is where she started her career 10 years ago in the NWSL. But I think that was a little interesting to see that Scott signed so late in the free agency period. And now that she is back and she is recovering from injury, I imagine that she'll want to take on that role as veteran leader, experienced even more so than before, because she did re-sign with this same team.
I mean, I think it's going to sort of be a little bit of a locker room role for a little bit, at least, as she continues to navigate the injury. But I mean, I think you said it best when you said that, players have referred to, this player as kind of that professional to sort of follow by example. Oh my gosh, we're talking about players that we've had the opportunity to chat with. I remember when we had, Alex Loera on the show, and this was someone who was navigating her rookie season. And then we asked her in the lead up to the playoffs, like, who was someone that she was trying to emulate. And she referenced Desiree Scott specifically. So I would anticipate that this is going to be a player that will still sort of hold that role amongst her teammates. And maybe even as she goes out to World Cup duty, because that's what we got to talk about too. How is this team going to be affected by the World Cup window when it comes into like who's the international spotlight on? And we are going off the assumption that somebody like Desiree Scott is trying to make sure that she is healthy and ready to go for selection for a Canadian national team. But we're also looking at a player like Debinha, who is likely going to be a big piece of what Brazil wants to present at the World Cup. But we also are keeping an eye on Adriana Franco as well. There have typically and traditionally been 3 goalkeepers that are named to a final World Cup roster. And we have seen the same 3 goalkeepers called into camps with Vlatko Andonovski for some time now. It's been a combination of Alyssa Nair, Casey Murphy, and Adriana Franco. So amongst these 3 players, I think possibly a big miss might be someone like a Debinha, but I also believe that Adriana Franco is someone whose absence that they might feel as well, because this is a player, I think, in watching their 2022 season, you could tell that they really pulled from. There were moments and stretches and matches throughout the 2022 season that just sort of felt like Adriana Franco games, and the reason they got results was because Franco had a standout game.
Not just the reason Casey got results, but the reason AD Franco is back on the U.S. roster right now is because of her performance with Kansas City in 2022. I mean, lights out performances, keeping the team in games, keeping shutouts, getting them, right? A big part of getting them through the playoffs and to the NWSL Championship was Franco. And I think of course, we have to tread a little bit lightly and say, hey, she could be on the roster. She could. It's likely. It's possible. I think Debinha is one of those players that's most likely going to be with Brazil at the World Cup. And I think depending on how Kansas City plays in the midfield, she will be a very, very big loss for this midfield, because we've kind of talked about it throughout the last several minutes with KC, because of how many midfielders they have, how many veterans and starting players they have. I'm expecting to see a bit of a different formation, or something different, a little cheeky, a little tricky from Matt Potter's side to really utilize all the talent he has on his roster and put them on the pitch at the same time. Now, when you take out some of those pieces due to international tournaments like the World Cup, what do you do then? Do you stick with the formation that's maybe built around some of these players that I'm looking at a Debinha, or do you shift back to what maybe will work better for the group as a whole? But that's asking a lot of questions of your players if they're not used to switching back and forth. So I think this come World Cup time, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with KC, because also losing someone like an AD Franco could be a bit of a drop off, right? Defensively, they're going to have to score a lot more goals. Now, again, the Challenge Cup is not happening at the start of the season. That it's happening in the middle of the season, July 9th through August 18th. The World Cup, July 20th through August 20th. So a bit of a crossover just for the Challenge Cup. Not many regular season games, but it's still a big factor that teams and coaches have to take into account.
There's a lot of pieces that they re-signed, but there's a lot of new pieces that have introduced themselves to the current. And there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on how this team gels together in the 2023 regular season. So maybe there's a little bit of a two-parter question when it comes to the biggest burning question surrounding Kansas City, because you said it, Lisa, on paper, this team is a contender. When you look at everything that they did through their offseason, beginning with their loss in the 2022 championship final. So, can Kansas City get all these moving parts running and working together, and will they make it back to the championship final?
That is the burning question. Can they get all these moving parts together? Because sometimes we see, for instance, with KC in 2022, not so many big stars on one roster, right? You look at someone like Lola Bonta, yes, she's a big name, or a Kristen Hamilton up top, but otherwise, they had a lot of players that were coming into this league on their first or second year, and it was so much of this team chemistry bought into it. It was Kansas City that you were scared of, not an individual player. Now they've got such big names that teams are going to be a little bit scared of individual players, but can they make that fear that they're imposing into their opponents come from a whole? Because I think that's what was so special about the current team last year, is that they were all so bought in. It was such a team dynamic. Remember the celebrations? Like this team was just having fun last year. Can they redo that? I think if it can be the same type of energy as last year, where they're having fun, they're all bought in on the same thing, this will be a very successful team because they have the pieces and the talent, but they've got to get on the same page everywhere else.
All right, well then let's roll that into a projection. What's going to be the projected finish for this team in 2023? I'll remind folks that in 2022, when we did our way too early previews and predictions for Kansas City, we went high. We said Kansas City is going to end their season in a top 5 finish, and they went ahead and they blew that prediction out of the water and ended up runners up in the NWSL Championship final. So I think we're gonna still stay high with this team, but aim even higher. We've got Kansas City Current closing out 2023 with a top 3 finish.
I agree. I think that KC will finish at the top. I mean, they finished the regular season number 5 and then entering playoffs in that number 5 spot. I think that they'll finish the regular season top 3. I want to see them host. I want to see them host a first round or get a first round bye in the playoffs. And I think they can do it. I think it's a lot of pressure for this, for any type of team to be dubbed as a top 3 finish. But this is a Kansas City team that on paper looks really good. And sometimes those are the ones that have the hardest time translating that to the pitch. But I like what Matt Potter's got going there. I like what he did last year with this team. I like the pieces that are still on this team that can bring the energy from 2022 into this 2023 roster. And they've got a lot of solid veterans that they're adding to this mix too, that know how to win, that understand what it's like to be in those high pressure situations. And I think they're going to do it. Kansas City is going to be a great team to watch this year. Top 3 finish for sure. Predicting that for 2023.
Well, they'll give us a lot to talk about no matter what happens, because there's another side of that spectrum that we'll have to pay attention to. You're either a winner or either a not winner in this league. So we'll pay attention to it moving forward. We've got more previews and more teams to chat about as we build up to the regular season for NWSL. Stick with us. We're going to chat all about Racing Louisville after a quick break.
Meanwhile, on Paramount Mountain.
Okay, we have the northern face, the southern face, and...
the Sylvester Stallone face. Stallone. Of course.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing?
Is that Dad? Yeah.
No, don't sneeze.
Dear God, no.
Hold it.
Hold it.
Don't do it. Don't. Ha! Gesundheit. Thank you. You're welcome.
Hey everyone, welcome into Attacking Third. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's segment, we're doing a Racing Louisville FC preview. So a quick reminder before we get into all things Louisville, please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. We're also on YouTube. Subscribe to us at youtube.com/attacking3rd. Make sure you get all your exclusive NWSL content, the previews, the recaps, the interviews, and everything else right here on A3 with us. The NWSL season starts on March 25th. You can watch all of the games on Paramount Plus and across CBS Sports platforms. And yes, we are doing every single team preview on a podcast and on YouTube. So tell your friends, make sure you get caught up with everything you need to know before the regular season kicks off. Lisa, we got to chat all things Louisville. Are you ready?
I'm so ready. I love diving into these teams. And Louisville, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this team as well, because I've got thoughts.
What does it all mean? That's what I think about when I am forced to think about Racing Louisville FC. Let's start with an overview of some things for this team. Head coach Kim Bjorkegren entering his second season with the team. They also added some depth, let's just say, to their coaching staff as well. They welcomed Bev Yanez as part of their coaching staff, running things alongside Bjorkengren as an assistant. And listen, I think if you're looking at Louisville, you have to have a bit of a perception where it's like, well, it can only go up from here, right? Because we've got another bottom half table finish for this team to talk about. They finished in 9th place in 2022, a 5-8-9 record for this team last year. We gave them an offseason grade of a C+. They made some movement this year. Wouldn't say that they were heavy hitters in the free agency market. And I wouldn't even say that they tackled the NWSL draft in a way that maybe made you think they're going to smash that rebuild button and build up with a lot of young pieces. So we just sort of kept them at an average C+ grade because they did make some very interesting moves, ones that we're excited about, names that ring a lot of cool bells in the international signings. So let's maybe talk a little bit about how some of these players arrived to Racing Louisville. What were some of these off seasons signings and what they look like, and what did the trades mean for this team along the way? Draft day was interesting because they fleshed out their roster in a certain kind of way, because while they did make a couple of picks, they also weren't afraid of making the draft day move. And they did that. They said, you know what, we've got a pick in the first round. Let's get involved in this. Let's make some moves and still exit this draft with a couple of selections. And they did that. They participated in a trade with Gotham FC. They initially had that 4th pick overall, gave that up for some allocation money and the rights to Paige Monahan, who is now listed on this preseason roster as a defender. We'll chat a bit more about it. And just when we thought that maybe Racing Louisville was going to stand pat and sort of build with what they've got in front of them, they participated in a couple other moves. One was a bit of a sign and trade on a loan with Liga MX Femenil side Tigres Femenil, and they also made a trade with North Carolina Courage. So they went ahead and acquired Carson, Pickett, and Abby Urseg for Emily Fox. And then coming out of the draft, they drafted Ohio State forward Kayla Fisher, Notre Dame defender Brianna Martinez, New Mexico forward Jaden Edwards, Alabama forward Riley Parker, and this is the player that was involved in a bit of a sign and loan and trade type of move. Nigerian forward Uchenna Kanu arrived to Racing Louisville FC via a transfer, and Racing Louisville went ahead and loaned out their rookie forward Riley Parker, who will spend time with Tigres Femenil out in Liga MX Femenil. So a lot of interesting movement for this team in their off season. So it wasn't enough for us to be like, wow, this is a home run out of the park. Like, we're giving them an A, but it was interesting enough for us to keep our attention and say, what does it all mean, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that with Kim Bjorkegren as the head coach of Racing Louisville, we will continue to see a lot of interesting, exciting international signings for a number of different reasons. One of them being that Kim Bjorkegren spent a lot of time coaching overseas. He's from Sweden. He coached in Sweden for years. He coached in China for years. He coached in Cyprus for years and in Greece. He just has had his hand all over the world of women's football. So he understands all these different styles of play, and he's seen players. I mean, that's how he got Wang Shuang last year, a trade in the middle of the season. It was a player that he had formerly coached and continued to have a relationship with and stayed in touch with, and said he wanted her. And now we look at all of these trades that have happened. I think a really smart trade for Kim Bjorkegren to get someone like a Paige Monahan, because not only does that add depth, but it adds a little bit of familiarity with the league already, getting a player like Monahan. And then, of course, Pickett and Ursig, massive gets out of North Carolina Courage. But I think that I'm really excited about Uchenna Kanu and what this Nigerian international will bring to the mix of this team, because Racing Louisville struggled last year in scoring goals. They really did. Defensively, they were put under a lot of pressure. Katie Lund ended up breaking a record, goalkeeper for Racing Louisville, breaking a record in terms of how many saves she had in the year. And that is fantastic. Katie Lund is a tremendous goalkeeper, and she was put under bullet fire last year so often. And she did have to come up with some incredible saves, but you shouldn't be putting your goalkeeper under 150 saves in a year, forcing them to make all of those saves. So I think it starts a little bit higher up the pitch, and that's really what we're seeing in this trade, or in this get with Uchenna Kanu. I think this is massive for Racing Louisville, and then really solidifying up that back line and getting someone like a Carson Pickett and an Abby Urseg, and Paige Monahan listed as a defender. But I think it could work, right? I mean, Paige Monahan is a veteran, and we've seen it time and time again how many forwards are converted into outside backs. And I think Paige Monahan could do it, right? If anyone could do it, I think it could be her. She's really impressive. She does have this tenacity to chase down every ball till the end, to be a good 1v1 defender, because she's been forced to do it with Gotham last year when they were put under a lot of defensive pressure. And Kim Bjorkegren saw something there that maybe not a lot of others saw. And that's really what I'm excited about, kind of how all these pieces are going to come together at the end of it all. And it's a bit of a balance, what you gain and what you lose, and how this works out. And for Racing Louisville, they didn't really lose too many pieces in this offseason, which is a big positive for them, because they needed to add from last year. They needed to grow and spruce up their roster. They really only lost defender, U.S. women's international player Emily Fox to North Carolina in that trade. That's definitely a big loss. This is a big player and international, but they gained 2 defenders in that trade in Abby Urseg and Carson Pickett. So Racing Louisville, great job. Way to win that trade with North Carolina, in my eyes.
Okay. They're winners. So Racing wins that.
Right there. Buy one, get one.
She said 2 for 1. Sign me up. I love that. I mean, okay, well, so maybe not as a detrimental as a loss as maybe others might consider that to be, in your opinion. You think getting the 2 for the 1 defender, it works out better in Louisville's favor?
I think it works out better in Louisville's favor because Emily Fox couldn't do it all herself. Emily Fox is one of the top defenders, right? I mean, we're coming off of a She Believes Cup with the United States, and this is the only player on the United States roster that played every single minute of the She Believes Cup. Emily Fox is a tremendous defender, but she couldn't do it all herself. So would you rather have a 100% defender in Emily Fox that can only play one position because it's only one player, or maybe 2 75% defenders? And that's not even being generous, because I think Carson Pickett is a top defender in this league, as well as an Abby Urseg. And now you've got 2 of them that you can split amongst the back line, cover a bit more space. They're also really familiar with each other playing at North Carolina, and they're veterans, right? They've got experience. Carson Pickett has international experience with the U.S. Abby Urseg, a lot of international experience with New Zealand. Yeah, I think it was a good trade for Racing Louisville. I do.
All right. So when we're looking at them as winners of that trade, when you're looking at maybe all of these acquisitions that they made during the offseason, which one for you is like the biggest win in terms of the players that they've added in the offseason? Is it one of Pickett or Urseg? Is it someone like a Monahan? I heard you chat a little bit about Uchenna Kanu. Who, in your opinion, is the big win and the big get in amongst
Carson Pickett? Carson Pickett for sure. This is a player that is almost a like for like swap with Emily Fox. And I think it's going to do great things for Racing Louisville, honestly.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I'm only as excited about the Uchenna move because they went and they got somebody like Carson Pickett. I want to see it.
Yes, that's it. It's like a hand in hand, because Pickett's going to be sending those crosses into the box. Man. And now we know Uchenna is going to get on the end of them. Oh my gosh. The fireworks. The fireworks.
We're going to chat a little bit more about the roster at depth for Racing Louisville FC, because there's a lot of players on this roster that I think maybe some folks may not remember. There's a couple players coming back from last season, and there's some draft picks that maybe we have to take a little bit of a deeper dive on. So stick with us after a quick break.
March Madness is almost here. Who's in? Who's out? The answers are revealed on the March Madness Selection Show, March 12th on CBS.
All right, let's chat a little bit about Racing's roster and go through this by position. Goalkeepers, they started off their preseason roster with Hillary Beale, Jordan Bloomer, Kelsey Daughtry, Katie Lund, Olivia Sekeny. That's 5, count them 5 for the preseason. Defenders, Abby Urseg, Rebecca Holloway, Julia Lester, Brianna Martinez, Paige Monahan, Satara Murray, Carson Pickett, and Ellie Pikajusama, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, and Zanetta Wine in this one as well. For midfielders, there's 7 total. Ari Borges is rounding out the midfielders here. Alex Chidiak, Savannah DeMello, Jalen Howell, Taylor Malham, Lauren Malay, Wang Shuang, rounding out the midfielder core here. 7 total, and 9 total forwards on Racing Louisville's roster. Kristen Davis, Jaden Edwards, Amina Ekic, Kayla Fisher, Parker Goings, Thembi Katlana, Jessica McDonald, Nadia Nadim, Riley Parker listed initially, but now we know part of the movement was to send her to Tigres Femenil, and Uchenna Kanu is now listed among the forward core in Racing Louisville. So when we're looking maybe position by position here, obviously, there have been a round of cuts as preseason has gone on. Some of these players are actually no longer featured on the preseason roster. But to start, it looked at the time that there was, a lot of draft picks at the moment, combined with some of the internationals that Racing Louisville has really acquired over these kind of maybe last 18 months with Kim Bjorkgren at the helm. This is a team that you could look at and point and say is kind of full of internationals at this moment, in every position, really. But when I'm looking at all of these forwards at the moment, I'm curious as to who's going to get the start and what that's going to look like in Bjorkgren's lineups.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the biggest thing for me. I think what is this coaching staff going to present to this team that is maybe a little bit different, or that could perhaps take them over that next hurdle in 2023. And I'm really excited for the inclusion of Bev Yanez on this coaching staff. I'm curious if maybe this is a little bit of an X factor for Racing Louisville. We're talking about a former player turned coach, now working with Racing Louisville, a team that is coming off of consecutive bottom half of the table finishes. How do you turn that around, right? How do you get that response out of players and to sort of get that buy-in to what the head coach is trying to present tactically, And there's also players on here that are navigating injuries as well that might not, be part of that equation in the first half of the season, let's say.
Yeah, which I think is really hard. That's a really hard thing to do, is turn around a team's mentality to get them over this hump that they have been sliding down for the last 2 years, right? They've really, really struggled to pick up a lot of consistent momentum to run forward with what you have in front of you and what this league offers. So yes, getting Yanez as part of the coaching staff is going to provide more in light on the situation in terms of the coaching staff, right? New ideas, a new perspective, a new way to talk to these players to kind of get them bought into what you want to do. I also think it's interesting that Kim Bjorkgren does acquire so many internationals on his roster. I think there are pros and cons to that in terms of what they bring to your team, because pros being they come from other leagues, and this is an opportunity. They've also experienced success in other leagues and with other teams, so they can bring that experience and reference that while they're playing for Racing Louisville in the NWSL. However, the NWSL is a league unlike any others in the world. It is so talked about how competitive it is, how close top to bottom teams are compared to other leagues, how physical it is, how fast and transitional. And sometimes that can hurt players that aren't used to that and aren't ready for that type of speed. Players either fall right into stride, and we've seen that throughout the league. I think Wang Shuang was one of those players that came in last year for Racing Louisville and stepped right up to the plate and was able to fit in seamlessly to this team and this roster. But when you have so many different parts, how do they make sure they do that going into this year? Luckily, though, there's not too many young players, right, on this roster. Although there's a lot of new ones, it's not we've got so many rookies.
No, I think maybe that's a little bit of a silver lining in this one, that the players that they are running with in 2023 have at least a year of professional experience, behind them.
Mm-hmm.
But, those are still young players, I think, that are continuing their development, right, in the professional league. And that was maybe one of the bright spots that came out of Racing Louisville last year. They did have a pretty strong draft in 2022, and Savannah DeMello was rated highly, as was Jalen Howell. There was a lot of debate about who would go number one, and Jalen Howell was included amongst the names of those prospects as a possibility to go to San Diego with the number one pick.
Mm-hmm.
We now know that DeMello and Howell ended up with Racing, and it's just sort of interesting maybe to note that these are two players who are going to enter their sophomore year, right, as professionals in this league. And with that, maybe they're still the young prospects that we keep an eye on moving into this 2023 season, because we saw DeMello kind of separate herself from the young prospects in Racing during 2022 with her play on the field. We saw her as at times sort of navigate and roam on the field as sort of this, linking type of player, kind of more methodical and passing and trying to combine with teammates. And we also saw her kind of evolve a little bit, or introduce herself as sort of a set piece specialist. I mean, my goodness, it just sort of felt like, we had multiple highlights of free kick goals for this player. So, I mean, I think these are still the two players to keep an eye on for Racing in 2023, as well as the young prospects.
Yeah, I want Savannah DeMello to build on what she gave last year in the league and with this team. I think set pieces, yes, that's great. If she can make that her bread and butter, do it. But what else can we get from Savannah DeMello? And I'm asking that of her as a sophomore in this league, in her second year. Last year, we were just happy with her scoring all these set pieces as a rookie. And I think to herself, she needs to be asking those questions. What can I do more of? How can I take on more leadership roles? And that's what I want to see from DeMello this year. As for a player like Jalen Howell, I was a little underwhelmed with what we got from Jalen Howell last year, just with how much pressure was put on this player and this name leading into the 2022 season as a top draft pick coming out of the draft in 2022, the experience that this player has winning national championships. And she came into a really tough Racing Louisville team that asked a lot of her, And I think she tried to do too much. I really did. I think that she tried to do too much. So for Jalen Howell, play simple this year, right? Like, be just a consistent player day in and day out. Be what your team needs you to be. You don't have to be the hero. And I think that in combination with DeMello, Howell could be really good this year. Maybe a little less pressure than being a rookie. And I think that could help a player like Howell, because I want to see her reach her full potential. And I didn't think we got it last year in 2022 by any means.
I don't think that's a unfair analysis. I mean, I think they re-signed this player. This is a player that this franchise wants to build with and wants to build around. I think that that's helpful. I think that she obviously performed well enough to enter those kind of negotiations with the franchise to say, hey, like, let's make sure that we get you a new contract, and we want to keep you here in Louisville and build with that. So I'm eager. I'm with you. I'm eager to see not only the continuity of DeMello, but even more improvement for somebody like Howell, and how those two specifically help run the midfield for this team moving forward. But they're still young players, right? So who is someone on this roster that we're looking for those young prospects to go ahead and still pull from in terms of that experience, veteran leadership. And we're looking at somebody like Lauren Millay in this section as well, because when we're going through these midfielders, we're talking about two players right now who are considered the young core of this team. And Lauren Millay, I think once upon a time, might have had some of those expectations thrown upon her as well. Like, we're drafting you. You are, someone that we want to make sure that we grow and develop over time. And hopefully you could slot in and get these extended minutes. And we saw her make the move from North Carolina to Racing Louisville. And she's really, during her time with Racing, has kind of emerged again as one of these stalwarts, these reliable players that you can see week to week in Racing Louisville starting 11s. And it's been cool to chat with her on A3, to talk about all things Racing Louisville and kind of hear how she's wanted to embrace that a little bit, that she's entering a certain phase of her career as someone who's no longer, could be considered maybe one of those young players of the league, kind of fully entering like the next step, like as a veteran presence on these rosters. And it was very, very cool to sort of see her run a play with Racing last year, and sort of how she was trying to combine with somebody like a former teammate and Jessica McDonald. And I think that this is a player that, that Howell and DeMello will profit from, working with and running midfields.
I agree completely. I mean, this is Millay's 5th year in the league. She was drafted in 2019, played with North Carolina before being drafted in the expansion draft to Racing Louisville several years ago in 2021. And when we spoke to Millay, that interview was during a preseason preview of Racing Louisville last year. And one thing she really talked about was how she wanted to be more of a leader, and she wanted to take on that role and be someone that younger players could look to. And I think that was the first step and the first turning of a page for a player entering their 4th year last year to kind of say, wow, I don't feel like a veteran, but I have to try to take on that role and try to be that. And she was very vulnerable in saying that to us, and saying that I'm being asked to take on a little bit more leadership than maybe I was not ready for, but just wasn't expecting, because she's always been one of the younger ones up until that point. And I think we saw glimpses of it last year, but now heading into this 5th year, Lauren Millay is that experienced veteran. She is. And I think she believes it. I think she's going to own it. And I think the players around her also believe that she is one of those experienced veterans that they can lean on, that they can look to, that they can ask questions to, and that Kim Bjorkegren can lean on a little bit. Because I think we might also see a player like Millay shift in and out of some different positions depending on what is needed of her. And that says a lot about the type of player Lauren Millay is, whether she's out wide. We could even see her be pulled in centrally a little bit more, higher up the pitch in midfield. She can really slot into a variety of different locations depending on the formation. And that's something you want from an experienced player, to show everyone else on the roster that this is what it takes to be a team player and to get the team win. I'm excited for Lauren Millay this year. I really am. This is one of the players in the league that excites me about how we could see a big jump in her growth.
No, I'm with you. I mean, these are the type of players, there has to be a certain level of trust, right? To sort of task a player with those type of different responsibilities, whether it's week to week or month to month. And she's definitely someone I think they're going to lean on a bit, in light of a World Cup year. We've been chatting a lot about players who may go missing for teams during long stretches of time in a World Cup year, because that is the moment where opportunity tends to present itself. And we saw it a little bit during the stretch of the Tokyo games as well, players getting time on the pitch. And the international spotlight for Louisville, shines in many different areas on the pitch, but there's a couple of players that this team may be without in light of the World Cup year. I mean, we've talked a lot on this preview about Uchenna Kanu, who might have World Cup responsibility with Nigeria, but depending on the final roster for China, we could possibly see somebody like a Wang Shuang on there as well. And though this is someone that we haven't maybe chatted a bit too much about on this preview, Thembi Kgatlana is someone that they were very excited to add to their roster last year, but unfortunately, through qualifiers, she ended up with a significant injury and was unable to get any time with the team during their run in 2022. But this is a player who has not only got experience in the international level. Kgatlana is returning to the NWSL after previous stints with Houston Dash, but might not be available for Louisville during certain stretches, as she might have responsibility with South Africa in the World Cup. So it's not just one, not just two, but possibly three players, and who knows, maybe even more in the build up to the World Cup.
Right. I think one thing to note for those that haven't been aware, I didn't see this announcement. Another player that some might think is an international, Abby Erceg. She recently came to Racing Louisville. She is a former New Zealand international player, but she announced her retirement from the international game. So she will not be in attendance at the World Cup this summer, which takes her off this list as part of our international spotlight. And Sandra, you asked me earlier, the trade for Fox, Pickett, and Erceg.
Yeah.
How I think that one won out. Racing Louisville doesn't lose Emily Fox now during the World Cup. I think that's strategic on Kim Bjorkegren. I do. I think
I'm with you.
Yeah, I think it's a smart strategic move. It is.
I think it's one that's going to pay off because look, another player that we actually didn't highlight too much was Katie Lund, and she's a goalkeeper that came up massive for this team over the year. It's kind of one of those like double-edged sword type of compliments to your goalkeeper, where you're like, look at all of these saves that this goalkeeper has made, and the other side of that spectrum is that the defense in the midfield were letting through a lot of looks on goal. But another player that they re-signed, extended a contract. This will be their goalkeeper moving forward. But I'm with you. I think having some insurances right on defense is gonna make that job for Katie Lund a little bit different than it was in 2022 than it will be in 2023. So I guess maybe that's what leads to the biggest burning question for this club, because really there's questions in each position as we're going through. Can all of these pieces, internationals, local talent, players that have been with the roster for a couple years now, can all of these pieces finally come together and make a playoff run?
That's the question.
It's burning.
That's the question. I mean, I think it's going to be really hard. I'm going to be honest. I think it's going to be really hard for Racing Louisville to come and put this all together. They have struggled the last 2 years to do that, to put together great games. They have these spurts and they have these moments throughout the season of greatness, right? Of going on a run. We saw that spewing from a player like Savannah DeMello. We did not talk nearly enough about Jess McDonald throughout this episode and what this type of veteran player can bring to this team as someone that is so driven, so focused, such a professional, and understands the game day in and day out. I think it's going to come down to the biggest names on this roster stepping up and playing bigger than themselves. That's a Savannah DeMello. That's a Carson Pickett. That's a Jess McDonald. That's a Lauren Millay being bigger than themselves. That's a Katie Lund in goal. They need a little bit of that chip on their shoulder this year to kind of almost, I don't want to compare two teams, but they almost need the energy that Kansas City had in 2022 this year. Chip on their shoulder. I can run and I can do this. And that's how they're going to do it. But yeah, I mean, can Racing Louisville make a playoff run? That is the burning question. I don't know.
I mean, I think it just leads to us making a projection. What's going to be the projected finish for this team in 2023. And listen, we talk all the time about the parity in this league and what it could look like. And I think it shows its head and rears its head even more in light of international cycles within it. And this is the World Cup year. There will be multiple players missing on every single team in this league in some capacity. What is Racing Louisville going to do with the season in front of them? What's our projected finish for them? You either go big or you go home. So maybe they shock the world and they close out in the middle three, or maybe they round out at the bottom three. I'm not gonna say that they're gonna shock the world. I think this is a team that will do better than last year, but I don't know if that's going to be in the playoffs. I believe, if memory serves me correct, this team finished in 9th place in these standings in 2022. And I think they will improve and they will finish in 8th.
That's not what I was expecting you to say. That's amazing. I agree. I don't think it's going to be a turnaround year for Racing Louisville. I just think it's a little bit too much of an uphill climb. I think they've got the pieces together and they will continue to grow. Like a middle 4 finish, right? I don't think they're going to be in playoff contention. They could be one of the teams towards the final days of the regular season, pushing for a spot, but it's going to be a long shot. They're going to need a lot of pieces to fall into place. That's what I'm predicting for this Racing Louisville team. Maybe they'll play spoiler at the end of it all, and they'll have some influence because that's where they'll be in the table. But I just don't foresee them punching their ticket and really making a turn from the last 2 years into this year, just looking at the landscape of the league and the other top talent that is out there.
No, I'm with you. And I don't think that's unfair to say. I think maybe there's, like I said, that is technically an improvement. That's technically an improvement from the year prior, going from 9th to 8th. But I think there could be like wins within other areas. Like maybe they don't go to the playoffs, but maybe you get someone amongst all these forwards going on in a ridiculous run. Maybe Uchenna Kanu goes on a maddening score streak and gives you 7-8 goals and humors a golden boot.
I would love that.
Maybe they get some more set piece madness from Savannah DeMello. Maybe there's a lot of good individual things that come out of 2023 for this team, but I don't know if it is smashing their way through the playoff picture.
And maybe we talked about the international spotlight. The way that this is working out this year, the regular season for the NWSL is taking a bit of a pause, and the Challenge Cup is being played overlapping
with Challenge Cup.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
maybe Racing Louisville wins the Challenge Cup, but they just can't get it around for the regular season. We've seen it before. North Carolina Courage win the Challenge Cup in 2022 and then just flop during the regular season. Maybe that's it. You know what? I'm going with that one. Racing Louisville makes a run in the Challenge Cup, but they can't get it together for the regular season.
Maybe that's the formula. So did Houston. Houston had to win the Challenge Cup and agonizingly miss out on the playoffs before they finally broke through to the postseason just last year. So who knows? Maybe this is that story arc for Racing Louisville FC. We'll see. You know us. We love to come back here and talk about how incorrect we were. So stay tuned. We're going to have so much more to talk about because we are doing team by team previews for every single team in the build up to the regular season. Thank you all so much for listening to Attacking Third. Please make sure to download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us too, subscribe to us on YouTube to get alerts for whenever we go live at youtube.com/attackingthird. And we'll be back with more team-by-team previews for the 2023 season. It kicks off March 25th on Paramount+.
Woo-hoo.
For Sandra Herrera and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.